as he said. He actually did a very good job pronouncing that. Most people give up on it. So I'm going to be talking about headless WooCommerce today. How many people here have heard of headless in general? How many people here have heard of WooCommerce? I hope that's that's everybody. All right. So that's me about 10 years ago with a little less gray. I've done a lot of different kind of e-com systems. I do Magento because I get paid well for it, and I do WooCommerce because I like it. So before I start, I'm sure there are going to be a couple friends that are going to watch this. I'm just giving my shout-outs. This would not be possible for me without the help of these folks. Kelvin, Carl, and Arnold help me day to day. Veronica and Patricio have gone through 3 iterations of me rewriting Cartfu to power this, and Nick and Sandy sort of check all of my code to make sure it makes sense. All right, so first question, what is headless? A lady was here last year, maybe, year before, Chrissy Vandennoord, and she gave a pretty good definition of what headless is for headless CMS. You can read what it says there, but basically it means backend does one thing, front end does whatever the hell it wants, right? Everybody comes up with different definitions. For some people, it means that the front end is completely separated. For some people, it means it's using the REST API. For some people, it means statically generated. The bottom line is the front end has, or should have, whatever. You can have a different team. You can have different technology. You can have non-web applications that are using it. And so that is a general idea of headless development. So anybody that's in the Drupal world, you know they've been hard into that area. In WordPress world, I think people are starting to get their minds around headless WordPress. Seen some pretty cool projects from companies like 10up. And so I've been playing around with the WooCommerce part because it's personally a little bit more interesting. So let's talk about static site generation a little bit. There are a couple of, sorry. All right. So static site generation is one example of headless. If you've ever used a system like Jekyll or Statamic, these are sites where they're using either flat files or they're taking something, some set of content from markdown files, and then they're generating an HTML site. This is something you can lift and drop into S3 or into any other storage system that you have. The big pro is they're pretty much impervious to anything. The con is whenever you want to make changes, it's slow to change. So slow to change meaning it's not dynamic. Now it could be you're updating your site every minute if you're just regenerating it. Anybody here remember Blogger, like original Blogger? You'd make a change on your site, you hit the button, and it'd spin while it goes and recalculates and regenerates the whole site. So that used to be sort of old hat, 10 years ago or 12 years ago. And static site generation is now back to the new hotness, right? Because everybody can drop their, I can set up a site and put it on S3, never worry about it ever again, right? So the other place that people think about for headless, again, is REST API, and as I talked about, you can use disparate technologies. Is very popular for sort of people using JavaScript to use WordPress or something else as a data store. I've used it personally with Rails, and somebody earlier was talking about using Laravel and having it in front of WordPress CMS as the data structure, or as the data application, right? For us that do development in other frameworks and other languages, there's a lot of stuff that WordPress already has built in that it behooves us to take advantage of. User management, decent schema, a large developer base, a large install base, easy server installs. These are all things, and low barrier of entry. These are all reasons why it makes sense to use WordPress as a backend system, even for stuff like ecom. Mobile applications, I've started seeing more and more of these, where you'll have an application for a museum or an application for a TV guide kind of product where you have synopses and the like, and that content is being powered by data coming from WordPress CMS or sometimes Drupal CMSs, things like that. Same thing with TV applications, and I've only seen one IoT device. It's using it for weather, but I'm assuming in the future there will be things like this built on top of the REST API with WordPress. All right, so e-com is different. A regular WordPress site, even if it's very highly updated, doesn't really change that much, right? So if you have a big site and you have a lot of content being pushed through, maybe you're updating the content once 100 times, maybe even 1,000 times a day. For the number of people that use your site, it might make much more sense to do a static generation, right? With e-commerce, every time somebody buys something or uses a coupon code and they act on your site, it fundamentally changes your site. So let's say I have a site that sells bike hats, right? And I have 3 bike hats left, 4 people come on the site, person 1 goes to buy it, person 2 goes to buy it, person 3 goes to buy it, goes out of stock, person 4 cannot buy it. If I use something like simple static caching, person 4 is going to see it as available, they will try and add it to cart, and they're going to be pissed off when they find that what was promised to them is no longer there. Right? A lot of the industries I've worked on, was jewelry, fashion, that kind of thing. It's a little bit more upmarket, and these are people that are used to getting everything they want. And so if you're having a sale on, let's say, some nice gold earrings, and it's half off, there are people, or 25% off, there are people willing to pull the trigger, and you pull the trigger, you think you got it, you're celebrating on Instagram you got it, and then it tells you you don't got it. Those are some fairly pissed off individuals. Right? So this is sort of what goes on when somebody goes through and does a completely static e-com site. It's not a good idea. There are all kinds of tools for how you get around this. If you're using a managed hosting system like WP Engine or SiteGround or Liquid Web, they do things like set up custom varnish rules. They'll punch holes for you for getting some of the data through so that stuff will update and keep your customers happy. But what if you don't have the time or the budget for that kind of operation? So let me go back to my example again of my bike hat or my earring that goes out of stock, right? So your options are either you do nothing, and so on your category page, it still looks like it's in stock. You click on it, it still looks like in stock. You get to the checkout, and that's when you find out it's not. Or you update your category page and you update your product page. If you are having a sale or something similar, or it's Black Friday or Cyber Monday and the like, your servers are busy just doing the add to carts, right? I think Chris Lemma had a phrase that was gold a couple of years ago, like add to carts per minute, right? That's the metric you judge e-com sites by. And so what you want is the only thing your servers should be working on are when people are actively adding to cart and actively paying you. If there's anything else you can offload, you go ahead and offload it. Am I making sense so far? All right, cool. So if somebody has that bike hat in their cart and you sell out of bike hats, they would also like to know that that bike hat is gone, right? Those are the kind of places where you need to update users. And with a fully static site, that doesn't happen. So, but you can do sort of a hybrid static site. So that's sort of approach 1 here. I have 3 approaches, each with different levels of success. So when you're looking at an e-com site, there's generally sort of 6 paths or 6 steps in the funnel. There's a home page, there are category pages, there are product pages, then you add something to cart, there's a cart page, you're ready to buy, you go to checkout. Once you've actually paid money, you get to the thank you page. There's a lot of extra stuff you can put on there. There's content, there's coupons, there's reviews, et cetera, but at its core, your goal is to get somebody that visits you to pay you money. So this is the core of any e-com site. So the top 3 are things that don't really need a database, right? You can statikize all of these if you are fairly clever with how you generate this. Okay. I'll come back to that. So standard plugins in the WordPress world, I don't know if anybody's ever used Really Static, which is kind of old now, or Simply Static. If you're using any of the cache plugins like W3TC, they will do static file generation for you, or they'll stick stuff in Redis and the like. But assuming we're just doing static file generation here, these are the ones that are easiest to keep static. And the reason is this. If you say 1% of your viewers are actually buying something, 100% of them are coming through the whole page. 90% of them hit the category page. 70% of them hit the product page. It drops down to 20%, 15% when you get to the checkout page. And from that, it drops down to 1% or 2% when you get to thank you. So instead of fielding 100% of the people with your database, with homepage and category page and the like, you're now only fielding maybe cart and checkout. And so your database is working, for the same amount of traffic, your database is working significantly less than if the database is supporting all the pages. And this is standard. I mean, I think everybody knows this sort of concept from the normal WordPress world, but this is much more important in the WooCommerce world because tolerance for slow sites, tolerance for not being able to buy, that's especially, again, in a sale environment, people are looking to pull the trigger, and if they can't, they're going to move on and buy somewhere else. Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you two images here. This is data from about 3 or 4 days ago. Used a DigitalOcean box, the $5 1 gig, 1 vCPU box, install WordPress on it, and it's the difference between doing a siege test that hits one page, that's a PHP page that has a little bit of DB connectivity, and then hitting a pure HTML page. So this is hitting a author page. And so for the author page, it goes and hits the database, it gets a little bit of information and presents it to the site, right? And so this is a 250 connections over a 3-minute period. So this sort of shows you the statistics here. 2,600 hits, about 71% success rate. We get almost 9 times better performance just using HTML as opposed to PHP for MySQL. And I know obviously that's not an even comparison, but if we take it back to this, what that means is if we're staticizing these pages, we'll get 9 times better performance for home, category, and product page as to what the servers will handle versus if these are being served by your database, right? You don't get quite the same gigantic jump. It's more like 50% bump from having PHP versus PHP no MySQL. So if you're using something like Simply Static, which converts it into files and is still served via PHP, that is faster than going from a database, but it is slower than just a straight-up HTML page. Because a straight-up HTML page will run faster with Apache, and it runs way faster with Nginx. Okay? So you can use Simply Static, but at scale and at high throughput, I don't trust the application I'm in. This is true for WordPress. It's also true for Magento. Because, again, those things should be working 100% towards getting you paid. So when you start before your sale, maybe you run Simply Static to sort of generate everything. But when you're in the middle of that churn, what you work on instead is using something like wget or curl to sort of periodically go and update files. So the way you'd handle this is whenever somebody buys something, you can trigger a on-save event for your order, which now says go find that static file and delete it. And then you add a second thing to your htaccess, which says when you go hit this URL, if it doesn't have a static file, load the normal page and then generate the static file. If you have played with Laravel or some of the other more complicated caching systems, you've probably seen examples of this. Another obvious one is handling JavaScript or handling the cart with JavaScript. Here's an example. So In fact, this really shouldn't even have the dollar amount on here. It should just show you the cart icon, and when you mouse over it, that's when it then goes and calls to the server and says, give me the product, or give me my cart information. And this means that when you're going from page to page, everything you see on those pages are exactly the same until when you want to see what's your cart's contents. Okay? So, dumb site regeneration will work every time, but it's not what you want for best user experience. So example of dumb site regeneration is I wget everything, or I do simply static for everything. It will work, but it might get slow, and you have to force it to index your entire site. Smarter site regeneration is when you blow away the cache on a page-by-page basis and regen on a page-by-page basis. All right, so approach 2 is something very different. I was inspired by, I think, Rachel Baker a couple of years ago. I was playing with REST API, and I stumbled upon this thing, Timber, which is a plugin that serves up the Twig templating language within WordPress. I don't know how many people here know what Twig is, but Twig is a handlebar. Can you raise your hands just so I know? All right, cool. So it's a handlebars or mustache-like templating language. Almost every modern language, from Perl, which might not be considered modern, to Node has support for this. Rails, Java, everything has support for this fairly simple templating language, including PHP, and more specifically including WordPress through the Timber templating system. Just in case you want to find it, here's what Twig looks like. So you see that it has sort of programmatic elements with the curly Q and the modulus icon, modulus character, and you see that you have variables like key here with double mustaches or double curls. So what I do here that's different than, I guess, normal is I'm splitting my page. Instead of it just being an archive product page for a category page, I split it so it's archive product and then the Twig file. So what that looks like is the archive product page is just about getting data. Okay? The Twig page is about then taking that data and giving it some kind of structure. The benefit of this is somebody can then work on the UI of your application and not mess up your PHP. Right? I will talk about that in a second. Oh, nope, I'll talk about it now. So what happens is this. You get your Twig template. You get the data from the code in the PHP regular template file. It smashes them together, and it's this second case. If it is not an AJAX call, it smashes these two things together and returns a normal HTML page like you would see with a normal archive page. If it is a JSON, or if it's an AJAX request, it doesn't serve up the Twig template. It only serves up the data you would have, and it serves that as a JSON response. So that's what these two things look like here. Okay? So this is a look at how you have Twig.js, which is JavaScript library for handling Twig templates. Just a quick view here. Based on how I'm storing my files, I know where my template's going to be. Oops. Yeah, that's where my template's going to be. And I'm going to call data with this method here. All right, so here's what this actually looks like when you're looking in Inspector. So if you're doing a normal page load and you hit it from Google or something, you're going to get Twig plus PHP spitting out a full HTML page. And so that's what it looks like here for this page. Same page, but now you're in the page and you click somewhere else. On the site already, you click somewhere else. It's now an AJAX request. So instead of you getting those two smashed together, all you're getting is the JSON response. What you'll see right above it is you see there's a template for that single product that's being loaded by JavaScript instead of being loaded by PHP. Okay? The benefit of this is you get somewhere about 75% more speed. And, oops. Yeah, I forgot a slide. You get about 75% more speed. And it is still something that Google likes. Because again, when Google or any other third party hits that page as a full page request, it's being served the PHP as it expects to see it. All right, so the third approach works about 80% of the time right now. And it's using Vue.js. And so this is a little gnarlier. Essentially, what we've done here is drop in some Vue code into the header and footer of the page. And then for each of the sort of elements on the site, category, product, et cetera, now making API calls to the REST API to go get that information. Okay? Now populating, just very similar to what I was doing with Twig and PHP data as JSON, we're now populating the Vue data, again with the JSON style data, in this case from the regular REST API. And this is what happens when you're doing a category page. And this is when you're looking at it inside a single product page. Do I have enough time? All right, cool. So that is all I have at the moment. Are there any questions? No questions? Yes, sir? Was your hand up? Okay.
So how do you deal with you say there's 3 different approaches, and you say there's 80% of the time that it works, but is there like SEO implications of doing that?
So the third option is not good for SEO at all. You're going to have to do pre-rendering with Brombone or something else to compensate for that. Of the 3 options, option 1 is the easiest. Option 2, I think it's fairly fast, but it makes Google happy. And option 3 is really more just for me to see if I could do it. The reason I said it was 80% is because I get it to work 4 out of 5 days. It's not in production yet. Other questions? Did I bore everyone? Yes, sir?
So in option number 1, when you're doing static site generation, have you played with the idea of having Nginx just do the page cache, because it will basically do something similar, cache it, and then you just expire an individual object through Nginx?
Yes, and so you can do it with Nginx, you can do it with Varnish, and so yeah, so that's hole punching, and you can do that, and lots of people do it that way. But in most cases, most people don't actually care to see their whole cart anyway, so why not just make it an AJAX request? So that's it.
I was just going to ask, what is a cart foo?
It's a system I was working on, which helps me, which is what I was working on to come up with some of this stuff. So it's I'm playing around with something that's like a Shopify look to WooCommerce. I run the WooCommerce meetup in Austin, and people complain all the time about it, about WooCommerce. So like, you know, I put in a store address in 4 places, but it's still not changed on the footer. Why? Well, there's a 5th plugin that you put that information in. So having something easy that would keep all those things in one place and redistribute it as necessary, that's essentially what it is. So, I got one more thing I can show real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So this is using option 2, assuming I'm still logged in. All right, so this is a product page, and again, this is, so you notice the XXX here. So this is a Twig template. Remember, we're combining these things. So as a UI developer, I never see PHP. This is the Twig that assumes that there's a PHP file that's going to get smashed with. And so now I can go in and change that from XXX to loopconf or something along those lines. All right, so let's inspect this as we go. And so you can see this thing, I know this is going to be tiny as all hell, and I apologize. When I refresh this page, it's a full page load, right? But if I was on home, and I click on this page, this is where you now see the twig template. This is where you see the JSON for that. Now this is, this is in the middle of a project, so there's way more data here than we would be publishing publicly. But this is how we're sort of going about debugging our process. So that's the product live. Any other questions?
Yeah, we got about 2 more minutes, so if there's one more question. All right, we're good. Thank you, Toyin.
Thank you.